The lead drone, a behemoth of alloy, struck the bulkhead with the force of a falling star, shredded by the gravity shift Clara had induced. Xylo 4 stood frozen as the sparking remains slumped to the deck, the smell of burnt ozone and recycled air heavy in the hold. Clara stood in the aftermath, a faint, placid smile on her face, a smear of starfruit juice on her lip. She looked at the twisted metal, then back at the console, dusting off her utility vest with a calm, practiced motion. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like someone who had just finished a chore. The deck plate vibrated like a plucked string under my talons. I stared at the cargo manifest, then at the human girl standing in the path of the primary depressurization vent. Sector 9 of the Icarus V was a high-G secure zone, a place where fragile biology should have been turned to paste by the stabilizers alone. Yet Clara Vane stood there, a small, unassuming silhouette against the flickering orange of the hazard lights. She held a thin loop of synthetic nylon cord in her hand, twisting it absent-mindedly around her wrist like a child's toy. "Clara, stay behind the blast door," I commanded, my mandibles clicking in sharp agitation. I was the lead logistics officer here. The deck was my concern, and her presence was a logistical nightmare. Cargo load is not combat staff. If the hold vents, your lungs will collapse before you can even signal for help. Clara glanced up, her static gray eyes devoid of the tremor I expected. She didn't move toward the safety of the blast door. She adjusted her grip on the cord, her calloused fingertips brushing the frayed ends of the nylon. "The tie-downs were loose, Xylo," she said, her voice a flat, unbothered whisper against the ship's low-frequency hum. "Could have been a mess. I'm just securing the load." "The load is secondary to the breach risk," I hissed. My scales flushed a deep, frustrated indigo. I had 47 years of logistics oversight, and I had never seen a human act with this level of detached negligence. Humans were soft, malleable creatures, designed for atmospheric comfort, not for the vacuum-hardened reality of a dreadnought. A piercing, dissonant chord shattered our debate, the containment alarm. Sector 9's automated defense array, a squadron of 14 Mk-9 drones, burst through the reinforced bulkhead. They didn't see a girl, they saw a biosignature in a restricted zone. The drone logic cores surged, sensors shifting to lethal. I reached for my sidearm, but a sudden flicker of motion blurred past my vision. Clara didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped into the central gravity well, the point of maximum mechanical load. She moved with a terrifying, unthinking economy. The drones opened fire, lasers stitching the air, but the girl was no longer in the kill zone. She had vaulted toward the central structural support, using the 4G shift not as a burden, but as a slingshot. She whipped the synthetic cord around the pylon, her body arching in a perfect, lethal curve. The lead drone lunged, its sensors locked on her center of mass, but she was already gone. She yanked the cord. Snap! The drone's primary chassis buckled against the wall, its logic core dying in a spray of sparks. 3 drones down. I watched, my scales pulsing a violent, panicked violet. How could something so soft endure the G-force? Every drone strike missed, displaced by her lateral shifts of exactly 4 centimeters. It was not a dance, it was a calculation. She didn't use force, she used the ship's own geometry. Crack! Crack! Another pair went dark. She stayed in the eye of the storm, one hand brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, the other pulling the cord tight across the drone's path. The drones regrouped, hovering in a defensive circle. Clara didn't retreat. She stood still, watching them, her face as still as a frozen lake. When the swarm charged, she didn't jump. She just stepped aside, letting their own momentum carry them into the bulkhead. The impact was absolute. The metal folded like paper. 12 seconds. That is how long it took her to dismantle the entire squadron. The silence that followed was heavy, ringing with the sound of shredded circuits and settling dust. I stood there, my clawed hand still gripping my useless sidearm. The air in the hold smelled of ionized ozone and burnt fruit. Clara walked past me, dusting her vest, looking genuinely annoyed that her task had been interrupted. She leaned down to pick up a piece of dehydrated star fruit that had fallen from her snack packet, popping it into her mouth. She didn't look at me. She didn't wait for a reprimand. She walked to the tie-down she had been working on, her hands steady, and finished securing the crate. "The load is stable now," she muttered, not looking back. I didn't file her as load staff. My fingers trembled as I bypassed the standard hierarchy, tagging her profile for top-secret command-level clearance. She wasn't a girl. She was a calibrated instrument, a weapon that had spent its whole life pretending to be a person. She didn't look at me as she passed. She just pulled that cord back into her pocket, the frayed ends catching the dim light of the flickering deck. I knew then that I would not speak of this to the council. If they knew what she was, what she had hidden behind those gray eyes, they would cage her, or worse, use her. And a weapon that chose to be a person was the most dangerous thing on the ship. The silence in the hold outlasted the chaos, deep and cold. I watched her walk toward the airlock, the cord still tucked in her pocket, an anchor for a killer. She disappeared into the shadow of the corridor, leaving only the smell of fruit and the quiet hum of the hold. I turned back to the console and keyed in the final report, deleting the record of the drone engagement. The drones hadn't malfunctioned. They had been erased. I limped toward the bridge, the metal of my own artificial limb feeling heavy. Some weapons look like girls until they choose to stop.